Welcome, everybody. My name is Lindsay Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the 22Q Family Foundation. I see people just joining in right now for our virtual webinar on executive functioning skills. This is obviously a hot topic in our 22Q community, and so we're super excited to be able to offer this to you tonight. We're going to be talking a lot about what executive function skills are, how it kind of affects an individual when they have deficits in that area. And also hopefully some helpful resources for you to take back to help you with those things, especially if you have a kid that's struggling with executive functioning skills. Before I go ahead and do introductions, just a little bit of housekeeping. We'll be recording this, so like always, if you need to view this or you need to step off at any time, just remember, as long as you're following us on YouTube, our YouTube channel at 22Q Family, you'll be able to get all of this information again. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If they're pressing questions during the time that Dr. Faye Dixon is speaking, just make sure you put like urgent question, just so that we make sure that we're not losing you during the conversation. But if not, just kind of keep it as a general question, and we will make sure at the end to have plenty of time to discuss those questions. So I'm going to be introducing the two ladies that are with us tonight. We have, of course, our main speaker tonight, Dr. Faye Dixon. She's a clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And I'm reading off my notes because she has quite a list of credentials. Clinical psychologist, director of clinical services and outreach at the UC Davis Mind Institute, and also part of, and I wasn't sure what part of the program you are, but for the AIR program, Attention, Impulsivity, and Regulation, which sounds really interesting, all at the UC Davis Mind Institute. We're super thankful to have you. This is obviously a very important topic to our community, so thank you for being here. And also joining us is Cynthia Parks, and I'm gonna let Dr. Dixon go ahead and introduce her.
Okay, great. Yes, this wonderful presentation is being brought to you today by a team, and Cynthia was just absolutely instrumental in putting this presentation together, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started. So whenever you're ready, you can share your screen, and like I said before, if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat and we will make sure we address them.
Okay, I'm doing screen share, and now I should be in presentation mode. So can everyone see this? Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I just want to talk a little bit about executive function challenges, specifically in reference to 22Q, but as you'll learn as we go along, these are executive functions that cut across many different conditions. So I want to start first with my disclosures. I have no financial relationships that would constitute a conflict for this presentation. You should also know, as a baby boomer, I'm still a technological neophyte, so please bear with any glitches that might occur. As Lindsay said, I'm a clinical psychologist with expertise primarily in ADHD, learning disabilities, anxiety, and depression. And this presentation today would not be possible without my student, Cynthia Parks. And what's really extraordinary about Cynthia is she is still an undergraduate at Sonoma State University here in California, and is in the process of applying to the PhD program at UC Davis in education. And she was a part of a summer research program where I got to be a mentor for her, and she just did a tremendous amount of work in helping to put this presentation together. So without her, I'm not sure that we would have what I'm hoping is going to be a wonderful presentation today. And I see that there's already something in the chat. Okay, great. And so I believe Lindsay's going to monitor the chat and she'll let me know if I need to stop and answer a question. Otherwise, I'm going to run through all the slides and then save plenty of time at the end to do Q&A. Okay, so what is executive function? Executive function is what makes intentional self-regulation possible. It's how you develop and keep track of goals. It helps you to plan and carry out the steps needed to reach them. It helps you to retain attention resisting distractions and to find alternative approaches when our original ideas or plans are not working. That is, a way to do flexible thinking. In terms of some of the challenges, this can come up for children or teens or even, young adults making careless mistakes in schoolwork, getting easily distracted or sidetracked, having difficulty following instructions, doesn't seem to be listening when spoken to, having trouble organizing tasks and possessions, failing to finish work in school or chores at home, avoiding or resisting tasks that might require a lot of sustained mental effort, especially things like homework, or often loses homework assignments or books or jackets, backpacks, sports equipment. And some of this info is from the childmind.org website, and we're going to pop that into the chat so that if you'd like to be able to access that resource, it'll be there for you. So what types of diagnoses manifest through executive function challenges? 22q is certainly one. ADHD is another. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, learning disabilities are just a few. So, executive function challenges are things that can cut across a number of different conditions. My expertise is ADHD. It's not 22q, but yet all of these have the same types of challenges in common, or can have them all. I love this because this is a simple way to think about what our brain wants us to do. We need to think about a task that we want to do. We need to plan out how to do it. We need to actually execute it, and then we know when to stop. And this loop kind of goes around and around. And in the best of all possible worlds, this is just a fluid functioning loop at all times. However, we know that for kids with different types of challenges, those little gaps between those arrows are where challenges, can occur. So the area of the brain that's, responsible for helping us to do this, executive function of, planning, thinking through, executing steps is called the prefrontal cortex. It's in the front of our brain. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for attention, for behavior and judgment, for making appropriate emotional responses. One way to think of it is like it's the CEO of our brain, or it's the conductor of our orchestra. It's trying to organize all of our meaningful, well thought out behaviors. So the prefrontal cortex is where things go right and help us to do tasks that we'd like to do, but it is also an area of the brain that's under construction until people get kind of into their mid-20s. So this is an area of the brain that for very little children is developing. So let's think about some of the impacts of executive function challenges, at home and at school. Parental family stress. So if you've got, a child or a teen who is always forgetting things, losing things, it it makes it hard for things to go smoothly. Academic challenges. And academic challenges in children who might have a great deal of capability, so that the challenge isn't around the material, but the organizational pieces that are perhaps needed to be successful academically. Behavioral and social challenges, knowing when to do a behavior, when not to do a behavior, how to engage appropriately so that the behavior matches the situation that a child or teen is in at the moment. Emotional dysregulation, if you're feeling upset about something, what's an appropriate way to express it? And something that people think about is perceived regression. And often this refers to a child can do a task perfectly one day. They can bring home their homework, they can do it all, and the next day, everything is completely disorganized. That's part of how executive function works, as a developing skill in a child, because it's just not, a smooth progression where you've learned this skill and you're going to be able to do it consistently. It kind of goes up and down. So sometimes it seems like, well, wait a minute, my child could do that last week. Why can't they do that this week? And it's that loop in the brain every now and then, there's the seepage in the circle of activities. And it seems like, they had a skill and now they don't have a skill. Skill is still there. It's being able to consistently apply it in the moment. So for many kids, this is what it feels like. Am I lost? Am I stuck? Do I know how to do this? Again, another website that can be helpful in terms of explaining, kind of what's going on in the brain of a child who's trying to organize their behavior to accomplish a whole host of tasks. So, how can we help children with executive function challenges? Familiarize yourself with developmentally appropriate expectations by age group and by grade level. So this one, the first one is about what we would expect for preschool age kids. So we're talking about kind of ages 3 to 5. And these are skills that develop over time. So I'm not expecting a 3-year-old to be able to do all of these things, but as we begin teaching kids at 3, by about the age of 5, they should be able to perform simple chores and self-help tasks with instructions or reminders. And so here it has like brush teeth, get dressed, put your shoes on. You're not expecting a 3 or 4-year-old to do all of those things that you've told them to do, but you can say, please brush your teeth, and have them do that. Please get dressed and explain what getting dressed means. Please put on your shoes. So you're just kind of one-stepping them along. And so preschool children begin to understand how to do a simple task with guidance. You're expecting for preschool age children that they're beginning to learn how to inhibit behaviors like, oh, don't touch that stove. It could be hot. It might burn you. Oh, we don't run into the street. We look both ways, or we hold the hand of a parent or an older sibling. If we'd like to play with a toy, we ask another child if we can do that. And these are not things that we're expecting, oh, between 3 to 5, they've got this down. These are developing skills during this time, but these are the kinds of things that you can expect a child to begin to master during this age range. And again, there's another little website here at the bottom, mindwell.us, about what kinds of things you can expect at different ages. And then when kids are getting to be about 5 to 7, so kindergarten through 2nd grade, to be able to bring papers home from school that they have received from a teacher who's helped them put it into a backpack, and then they're able to bring that home. Same thing in the opposite direction, that as a parent, you're getting everything ready, they put that little backpack on and they take that to school. To be able to begin to complete a homework assignment with assistance from another adult, up to about a 20-minute max. And I know that in today's educational world, I've seen much more of a mismatch between what children are given to do and what it really makes sense developmentally. And I know that's an area that I sometimes talk with teachers about, and try and help them kind of negotiate between, these are the educational standards that my district has, but this is what's appropriate for a 6 or a 7-year-old to do. But completing a homework assignment with adult assistance is a skill that tends to develop in those early elementary school ages. And in terms of, behaviors to inhibit, safety rules, like what's okay to do on the playground, what's not okay, what kind of language we use, how to raise one's hand and wait to be called on, and how to keep our hands to ourselves. By the time kids are getting to kind of 3rd to 5th grade, which is that latter part of elementary school, being able to perform some simple chores, that you could ask a child, oh, can you help me with dishes? Can you pick up in your room? Can you help me with vacuuming? Being able to keep track of belongings when they're away from home. They wore a sweater to soccer practice. Do they remember to come home with the sweater? And being able to do a better job of completing homework assignments and beginning to do some of them on their own. Not all of them, and certainly not long and complex ones, but beginning to master that skill of being able to work independently. And then to begin to understand changing daily schedules, and it's Tuesday, so it's soccer practice today, or on Thursday maybe I go to piano. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about 8 to 11-year-olds beginning to have an understanding about. And then when we get to middle school, and this is where the expectation of kind of self-control and self-organization really begins to ramp up. Because in elementary school, teachers and parents really function as frontal lobe assistants for children. They direct a lot of that behavior. By the time we get to middle school, in an ideal world, there is enough beginning of that sort of self-control, self-organization that, with continued teacher and parental input, that kids begin to learn how to do things like how to organize their schoolwork, how to keep an assignment book, to know where all of those are, to be able to follow a school schedule. And this is one of the main, I think, kind of sticky points for kids with executive function challenges. When you get to middle school, you start to have more than 1 or 2 teachers. You may have 4 or 5 teachers, all of whom have different expectations of how they want work completed in school and how they want work completed at home. And that's part of that beginning process that in middle school, students are learning how to do. Students are also learning how to carry out longer term projects, how to understand a timeline, again, with teacher and parental input, so that they can do multiple steps over multiple projects. And then when we get to high school, it's really about managing schoolwork and home tasks effectively on a day-to-day basis. And that means completing and handing in assignments on time, studying for tests, creating and following timelines for long-term projects, and being able to adjust their effort and their quality of work in response to feedback from teachers and others, like a grade on a test or a grade on a paper. And again, this is a developing skill. This is not like, oh, every high school kid can do this. It's like, over time, this is what teachers and parents have been building towards and laying the foundation with the earlier steps of how to do this. And by, high school, especially by the end of high school, students should be able to establish and refine a long-term goal and be able to make plans for meeting that goal. So to recap, the challenges in executive function can be things like having trouble starting or completing tasks, have difficulty prioritizing tasks, forgetting what they've read or heard, having trouble following directions, or perhaps a sequence of steps, like what goes first, second, third, and how to order that for themselves. Getting a little worried or panicky if, the rules or routines change from what they're used to. And being able to do that kind of divided attention or switching focus from one task to another, or becoming overly emotional or fixating on things. Having trouble organizing their thoughts, keeping track of belongings, and having trouble managing time. So all of those are those challenges that we talked about at the beginning. And now we're going to talk about, so what kinds of things might help? And again, a website at the bottom there, understood.org, that talks a lot about these. So how can we help kids? Familiarize yourself with what's developmentally appropriate, by age and, grade level. Thoughtfully consider your child's capabilities. Because when we're talking about typically developing 8-year-olds, the idea is to think about, where does my child fall along this continuum, and what kinds of assistance might they need from me, from a teacher, from a tutor. So it's really important to understand the match between what the task demand is and the capabilities of, that the child has currently, so that you can begin to think about, well, how do we bridge that gap? And then ask yourself, what environmental accommodations can you implement that are going to help your child be successful? So for preschool kids, basic checklists with pictures. One of the things that I do anytime I go into a classroom is I want to see, are there visual reminders or helpers that kids will know what to do? That, a preschooler, kindergartner, when they walk into a classroom, there should be guidelines for, this is what I need to do, which of course they'll need teacher reminders about, but being able to see that is particularly helpful. Things like timers, we're going to set the timers and see how quickly we can pick up the classroom, and then we're going to sit in circle time. Positive reinforcement. And when I say positive reinforcement, things other than, oh, what a lovely girl you are, what a great boy. I mean, being very specific, like, wow, you picked up those toys very quickly the first time I asked you, and then you came and sat in the circle. That's very specific praise, as opposed to just kind of general, wow, you're a terrific kid. And for preschool kids, and this applies to other kids as well, you're not expecting perfection at the beginning. You're looking for improvement over time. It's always really fun to go into a classroom at the very beginning of the school year. And for preschool kids and kindergarten kids, most of them are kind of all over the place. But you see, as kids start to head into that end of that first month, week 5, 6, 7, there is a better understanding and a better ability to do what is asked or required for in that particular environment. So when we're talking about, kindergarten to second grade, routines can be broken down into steps. I'm always looking for checklists that are posted in classrooms. Most 5 to 7-year-olds are not yet fluent readers, so we're looking for pictures. Does a child know what to do when they walk into a classroom? What do I do with my backpack? What do I do with that homework? Where do I put that? And you can have both lists that are or visual reminders that are helpful for all kids, but also customized ones that can be helpful for a particular child. Our house or class rules, posted, several places. And is it a classroom that uses, some sort of behavioral management system? I used to be a consultant outside of Philadelphia for a school that was specifically for children who had dyslexia, and many of whom had co-occurring ADHD. And every classroom was required to have a very specific behavioral management program that was based on a system of positive reinforcement and goals, so that it taught kids how to be successful over time and what the expectations of behavior were, and giving kids opportunities to be successful at home and in school. And we cannot say enough about reward. And I'm going to talk a little bit about consequences in a minute. When we're talking about 3rd to 5th grade, which is kind of 8 to 11-year-olds, organizational training, ending the day with a check-in, with the teacher, or at home at the homework, there's a check-in, seating students near a teacher if that is helpful. Some children being closer to a teacher is a really good cue for organization and for attention. For other children, it's being further away, and it's figuring out which thing helps which child, and being able to have, flexible seating options, wiggly chairs, standing desks, cushions that, sort of allow movement. And being able to have, frequent movement breaks are really helpful for children. The average person, and I'm talking about adults, do a really good job of attending 15 minutes, 30 minutes. That is way too long for the vast majority of children, especially when we're talking about elementary and even middle school. So we often are asking kids to attend at a for a time period that's really outside of the developmental range, without having some breaks, especially, for movement. And then in middle school, this is where you can begin to discuss expectations with kids and with their teachers, and have them working together to figure out what's going to help them be most successful. This is when you can do things like develop a 504 or an IEP plan, discussing that with administrators and teachers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. But setting up clear expectations for homework, what are the expectations? What are all the pieces that are needed? How to do a long-term project, home responsibilities, with very clear rewards for completion and consequences for not being completed. However, things go much further when we err on the reward side as opposed to the consequence side, because for kids who have challenges, if every action or deficit or challenge has a consequence, very quickly rewards are all depleted. And if you've run out of anything positive that you can partake in, then what is your motivation to continue? So it's really, really important to sort of have the whole reward consequence piece in the right proportion. And when we're talking about young kids through elementary school, we're erring much more heavily on the reward side and helping them to be successful. And then the consequences, but especially natural ones, have those happening more in middle school and high school. And then accommodations that can be helpful in high school, having an extra set of books that can be kept at home, using assistive technology. I mean, one of the things that has been somewhat helpful in the last year with so many kids who attended Zoom school is that for, families, districts that had really good access to technology, is that, became a really good way to help kids manage a number of different things. For some kids, it's allowing extended time on classwork, homework, quizzes, tests. Often some of that are things that have to be formally negotiated. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But providing detailed and written instructions, emailing parents a list of assignments, or posting them on the school website. The school where I consulted outside of Philadelphia, every Monday, the homework for the entire week was emailed to parents or posted on a specific site so that parents could be monitoring at home what the expectations were for that week. Teaching students how to use a digital, notebook, things like Evernote, how to, accumulate kind of a knowledge bank, helping students use, timers or visual task timers like time tamer, watchminder, drop task, and especially for little kids, they have no idea what 15 minutes is. Like, oh, you have 15 minutes to complete this task, but there are actually timers that can visually show how time is elapsing, so that over time you begin to understand, like, oh, when the arm is here, I have this amount of time, and when it's here, I only have a little bit left. Providing time to help kids organize, do locker cleanouts, and providing study guides prior to tests so that students know how to organize their learning. So, parents and teachers can act as the frontal lobe, guiding children towards tasks and decisions to affirm and grow their executive function skills. Accommodations for impulse control and emotional regulation might also be necessary. Things like offering a calm spot or a break for a student. Or a child when they're at home, creating a plan ahead time so that a student might be able to signal a teacher if a student is capable of doing that. A lot of these are suggestions that you have to figure out, is this going to be helpful for this particular child, or is this child going to need more resources to be able to do this? Being able to utilize emotional regulation systems, scheduling a weekly check-in with a counselor or mentor or teacher to see how things are going. This was always my favorite, letting the student run errands for the teacher to provide a break. When someone sees that a child, particularly in school, is getting kind of antsy, it's like, Simon, can you help me and take this down the hall to X? That's a sensory break. And for a lot of kids, that helps to do a reset. For others, it may not. So for a lot of kids, it's finding out what kinds of things work. and being able to, call on other resources and get outside help if they're, if more or a higher level of intervention is needed, something like a crisis plan or a behavior intervention plan, for kids who are really struggling with issues around behavioral and emotional regulation. And as always, making sure that we've got clear expectations. So for school services, and I would suspect many of you have already heard of these, there is the IEP, which is the individual educational plan. That's a part of the, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So that is a federal law that kind of codifies these are the types of interventions that must occur to help this child to be successful. Then there are 504 plans, which are really accommodation plans. Doesn't have the same amount of teeth as an IEP, but can be very helpful for kids who just really need, kind of limited amounts of support. Organizational skill interventions, classroom interventions, educational support services like tutoring. And I think that's about all I wanted to say now. That'll give us about 20 minutes for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a minute. Here's how to contact me if you have any further questions. I am the co-director of Lab AIR, which stands for Attention, Impulsivity, and Regulation, which is at UC Davis Mind Institute. So you can take a snap of that if you have questions after today and want to reach out to me. And here are parent and educator resources. So if you've got a phone and you want to take a photo of that, open up the camera, you can scan this QR code and it's going to take you to a hyperlink of websites and other resources that might be helpful. So I'll leave that up for a minute.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dixon. I feel like there's so much to cover with this topic.
So I'm going to stop the screen share. If somebody didn't get it, I can throw that up in a minute. But now I can.
And Cynthia's been doing a great job of posting all the links in the chat as well. And I also copied them so I can send them out in an email in the future. So if you do have any questions, we haven't received any yet, besides someone was interested in seeing if they could access these slides. So if that's an option. If not, also we are, like I said earlier, we're going to be recording this. We are recording this, so it will be on YouTube.
Yeah,
so
I think I can save it as a PDF and then I can send it to
you.
you.
That would be great.
Let me make a note of that. I'll have to have someone with a younger brain than me help me know how to do that, but I will certainly do that.
I can, Dr. Dixon, I can actually drop a PDF into the chat. I'll do that.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad that Cynthia's here with us today to help us. It's perfect timing for me because my sons, we just moved to Colorado to a new state, so a new district, new school. And one of the things that I was going to bring up is that I think he needs some kind of executive function goal in his IEP. His IEP is this Friday. I know you talked a lot about, we have a lot, I'd say the majority of our kids, if not a lot of kids in our community, have some type of support, whether it's a 504. Generally, it's more of an IEP because they tend to have more needs, not just executive function needs. Right. But in your experience, is this something that tends to be written in IEPs at even a younger age? I know you mentioned middle school.
Yeah, I think it has to be very concrete, as opposed to saying, oh, I'd like some executive function help. Like if the struggle is around homework, then breaking down where the difficulties are so that it can specifically be written in, like, well, so much happens electronically now, but in the old days, it was, you'd write the homework in the child's book, it would go in the backpack, the parent would take it out, the parent would read, okay, this is what I need to help my child do. Now, so much of that can happen, between email, There are different programs that teachers can use, like Class Dojo, or, things that help, parents to know, okay, this is what we're expecting from your child this week. These are all the steps that might be helpful. And I don't have a little kid in, elementary, middle school, or high school anymore. But so maybe I can ask Cynthia, as a younger parent, what kinds of things are, that you found helpful,
I am a younger parent, but I have two children with additional needs and learning differences. And I have found that really just developing a plan using tools like Dr. Dixon has provided us here, and really reviewing them, having a good foundation for what I'm asking for, and bringing that to the table, and making those resources available to the teachers and counselors and members of the care team really goes a long way with securing services.
And one of the things that I really like, we're already, kind of well into the school year, but often what's really nice, and teachers have told me they love this, is that writing a letter to your child's teacher before the school year starts to really kind of give a little biography of your child, not long, but just, kind of a page, describing what they're like, what's helpful to them, where the pinch points are for them, can often have a teacher realize, oh, gee, I just got multiple letters, and there are a number of kids who are going to need help with how to organize their backpacks. And so, kind of being proactive, and also trying to form, a team, I think, with your child's teacher or teachers, can be really helpful, to be proactive.
Yeah, definitely. We have a few questions that just came in. One is, what early activities can I employ for my 3-year-old to best build his early and foundational executive functioning skills?
Let's say rhyming games, things like, just games like, what is it? Red light, green light, which is when it's the green light, you can do this thing. When it's the red light, you stop. Those are the types of games that help kids to realize, oh, there are times when we do things and there are times when we don't. Trying to think of other things that are fun. Things that sort of help kids to be able to do things over time, like puzzles, puzzles that are at the right developmental age, but it's like a puzzle that's not so hard, but maybe a puzzle that takes a little bit of time to do, So for a 4-year-old, it could be a puzzle that takes 5 minutes. For a 4th grader, maybe it's a puzzle that would take an entire hour, but you do 20 minutes today and 20 minutes tomorrow and 20 minutes the next day. And the same thing with chores or activities. Baking cookies, cooking, those are all things to help kids to understand, if we want this to come out right and taste really good, we have to follow all the instructions. And so cooking especially is like, you have to do a whole preview. So you have to read the entire, recipe. And then you have to figure out, what are all the tools I need? And when am I going to need them? And so so a simple activity like baking cookies helps kids to understand sequencing. I got to do this first. And if you're like me, even though I'm a really good baker, I often forget butter. And it's like, why did this come out weirdly? So things like that.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, the next question says, having deficits in executive function skills, are these lifelong issues, or can they be resolved as the brain matures, or with like proper accommodations and support?
Mm-hmm. Yes to all of those. For typically developing brains, we don't have, our ability to inhibit, make good decisions, plan clearly. doesn't come online until mid-20s, kind of late 20s, which I always find really interesting because I teach medical students and I'm thinking, I've got this 24-year-old, are they really ready to do surgery? So for typically developing people, those skills kind of come online, mid to late 20s. For anybody who has ADHD, 22q, ASD, that's going to be a little later, but brain development is on our side, and especially brain development where we get good resources and steps that help us along the way.
Okay, that is encouraging to hear.
Yes. Yes. But there are some people who still in their 30s are struggling with executive function challenges. And so it's really in early adulthood, when things are still a challenge, it's like, okay, what things must I always have? And what's really nice is that with smartphones, you essentially have a computer or a coach in your pocket. And if you can have someone who helps you set that up, there are things that can help you to be on time, that can remind you, oh, this is due, this is how, this is going to be due in 3 weeks. So this week you have to do this, and next week you have to do this, and then the third week it's going to be due. And there's some people who are always going to have to do that.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of our community, obviously there are some things that individuals struggle with lifelong, and then there are some things that we see great progress in speech, for example, early intervention with speech therapy for our individuals.
Yep.
Those miles. So just something to kind of note. Okay, the next question is, do you have any recommendations to address meltdowns in young children with executive functioning challenges?
That, I was going to say, that's hard. I mean, and I think it's sort of understanding what has happened beforehand. Like, do you know you're going into a hard situation? Is there a way to kind of prepare, a child? The example I always think about is like going into Target. If you know that an exciting, overstimulating place like Target for a 5 or a 6-year-old is going to be an issue, the time to prepare for that is before you get in the car, when you're still in the parking lot, when you've gotten the shopping cart and you're going into the store. But sometimes meltdowns occur, and being able to find kind of a safe place to, you're safe, you're okay, I can wait a minute, which I know is sometimes hard for parents, because it's like you have 10 minutes. So you don't have 20 minutes to, kind of work through, but certainly whenever possible, thinking, what are the challenging situations that I'm going into right now, and do I have enough time to be able to manage whatever situation may come up? And I know, I mean, that's like easier said, than done, but I think preparing ahead of time and thinking about, if something comes up, can I take the time to just allow the calm to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And for really young kids, sometimes they need to have words to, just saying things like, it seems like you're feeling really upset right now. I can just sit next to you and help you be calm. Or, would you like to sit over here and I won't look at you right now? It's different things work for different kids in different settings.
Yeah, and I think it's so challenging is in our community, especially we have lots of comorbidities with, anxiety, ADHD, some are non-verbal.
Right.
So there's so many probably different reasons also why a meltdown could be happening. I mean, I personally have learned this with my own 7-year-old. But yeah, I think just sometimes trying to give your child the space they need to kind of have that.
Yeah. And that's often hard. You have 5 minutes. You need to run this errand, and
Yeah. Okay, someone has a question regarding adults who struggle.
Mhm.
My daughter's 25. We are still working on all of these things. Reward systems are in place. The gains are very slow. I was hoping for input for adults who struggle with executive function skills. Anything
Um,
that you'd like to add? I know you kind of shared a little bit.
right. For, young adults, and these kind of services are all over the place, like, kind of coaching, especially somebody who's not a parent, to be able to say, okay, let's look at the things that are hard for you, and really having very specific interventions. And that's really hard to come by because we don't have any good national standards for who can be a coach and who can, I mean, anyone can call themselves a coach. There are some organizations that I think have tried to begin to do to have standards, like I think it's ADHDcoaches.org is one organization, Edge Foundation .org also does a lot for high school and young adults into their 20s and early 30s. So sometimes sort of those kinds of coaching interventions can be helpful, because, a 25-year-old is probably wanting to be a little bit more independent. So having a third party who can help with some skill development could be helpful.
And then to tie into that, so through our organization, obviously the parents that are watching are probably aware, but we provide an advocate who specializes in 22Q. Her name's Donna Cutler-Landsman. And so she's awesome. So I encourage all parents that have, kids under, high school graduation, the earlier the better, to access those services, because she's really good about adult transition planning, especially when we get into, exiting high school, what that will look like for these individuals, because, a lot of the executive functioning skills are following them, as they're adults. So just something to consider. And I think Cynthia just put in the Edge Foundation link, so thank you for that. Any other questions? We have about 6 more minutes. I do want to encourage you all. I feel like I learned a lot. This was not a topic that I had heard of before having my child, and I am a previous educator, but I feel like it's kind of a newer term. I mean, out of curiosity, like, how long has this term executive function been around?
Like in the neuroscience, in the psychology and neuroscience literature, I think we've been talking about this probably 20, 30 years, but I think it's really been made practical more in the last 10 to 15 years. Like we've sort of taken, I think, these academic concepts and sort of said, okay, when we talk about executive function, what behaviors are we talking about? And what are we talking about at specific ages? So yeah, I think definitely, in the last 10 years or so, it's become clear.
Well, and I think it's helpful too, as a community, we're kind of constantly, unfortunately, having to educate school staff. The medical team, for the most part, usually figures out 22Q and what the child's needs are. But really, the hard fight is once our kids enter school. And so I think this webinar is going to be so helpful for all of you that are watching and watching on the replay, to be able to just easily take the link from our YouTube channel and all these links that we're sharing, that I'll be sharing with you, and just educate, your teachers, therapists, anyone that's working with, even your family, the judgmental family members. We all have those people. I know I have some. Just to kind of say, like,
my favorite phrase, my favorite phrase from having run parent education groups in the past, specifically for kids with ADHD, is the parent who comes in and says, but my parents, the grandparents say, but he behaves for me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Of course. Okay, we have one more question. I have a 12-year-old son with cystic fibrosis who also was recently diagnosed with 22Q. He has difficulty with emotion regulation and is very frustrated and overwhelmed with how he feels on a daily basis. Physicians are quick to medicate. What are your thoughts on medication, mainly for behavioral circumstances?
I mean, I think you have to use a multi-pronged approach. So you'll also want, you may find it helpful to consult with either developmental pediatrician, psychologist who specializes in child behavior, and really sort of form a team with the medicating professional and try and figure out what kind of behavioral interventions can we implement, and do we want to try those first and then supplement with medication, or do we want to be doing both of them, at the same time? I work with a developmental pediatrician who likes, to say that medication sort of provides a platform of readiness on which you can build behavioral interventions, that as opposed to like, well, we're going to use medication and this is going to address these behaviors, it's that these are going to create a synergy. And so I think it's having a team of professionals.
Thank you so much. I think that's an important question that a lot of our community is always wondering. So any further questions? It's very, very interesting. Very lots of info. I have a whole bunch of notes that I'm going to take back to my team on Friday. So hope we don't have any further questions. I just want to thank you again, Dr. Dixon and Cynthia Parks, for joining us today. This is definitely going to be viewed, I'm sure, many, many times on our YouTube channel. We did have a great turnout tonight. And also, just for anyone that's watching, we're always trying to offer different webinars of content that you guys need or are interested about. So please feel free to reach out to me, Lindsay at 22qfamilyfoundation.org. And it's Lindsay with an EY. If you have any ideas of new content that you'd like us to share, but I do really appreciate your time, Dr. Dixon, for putting together this presentation and taking time out of your evening to talk to our 22Q community.
Certainly, it was a privilege and an honor.
And everyone's saying thank you in the chat. So, well, thank you so much. Hopefully we get to see you again soon. And thank you also, Cynthia.
Thanks for having us. You have a great evening.
You too, guys. Good night.
Bye-bye.